gentle reminder, make sure to sign in with the roster thing. I want to make sure that everybody wants to make sure that we have accurate count of how many people came to classes. So with that, we are going to be talking about the chivalric philosophy of Geoffroi de Charny. We were already discussing a little bit earlier before the class started about why this person was important. You know, for the SCA, de Charny is one of the most quintessential people that you have to read if you're interested in chivalry, right? So I figured it is rather important to discuss him, not in the idyllic sense of what he could be, but rather what he is. So with that, a quick brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with historical context because we can't divorce that philosophy, his philosophy and his writing, from what was going on around him, right? So very briefly, we're going to go over the major things that are relevant to this conversation about the 100 Years' War. From there, we're going to be talking about the Book of Chivalry proper, themes and discussion. Throughout this, by the way, we're going to have questions that I would like for us to discuss. We have an hour and a half, so we got time. And I also have a watch. So if things are dragging a little bit or we need to move on, I'll make sure to push that in that direction. Throughout this conversation, we'll be applying Charny's ideas of chivalry into the SCA. Again, that's going to be kind of interlinked between point 2 and point 3. And then lastly, this is for a personal indulgence, notes towards a kind of a theory, maybe, of comparative chivalry. I've taught a class about Ramon Llull before. So one of the things that I'm future kind of working towards is the ability to take all of these authors that wrote books of chivalry or books about chivalry or the cultural equivalent of that and being able to kind of create a comparative theory based on these things. So we'll start with the historical context, setting the scene. So de Charny, for those of you who may not be informed, was a French knight in the 100 Years' War. What's important here is that the 100 Years' War begins at around 1337. And funnily enough, this is when we first start to hear about de Charny proper. We hear about how he was taken prisoner, how he took prisoners, how he swore fealty to the various kings of France, so on and so forth. Throughout the 1340s in particular, the French kingdom, was experiencing heavy losses during the 100 Years' War. So what does this mean? For Charny, who appeared in the historical record in about 1337, all of a sudden we get about 10 or so years of him experience tactical military loss after loss after loss after loss. So one of the questions that should be popping up in your head is, okay, what is Charny thinking about when he sits down to write about that Book of Chivalry? What is he responding to? In 1352, we actually get the publication of the Book of Chivalry in conjunction with King John II's creation of the Company of the Star. Right? So this is a chivalric order. This is the first military order created by a French king in the Kingdom of France. It lasted for 6 more years because what happened is Poitiers was really bad for the French. Charny dies, they experience heavy losses. The Company of the Star lasts 2 more years. It's functionally defunct after that because many of those knights who were part of this company died in Poitiers as well. This was not a good time for the French. Let's think about it like that.
What's the oriflamme?
Thank you for reminding me. The oriflamme is the heraldic banner of the Kingdom of France. So Geoffroi de Charny at the time was particularly famous. He was well renowned. I'll get to that in a quick second. But one of the distinct honors that he had in Poitiers was the ability to not only sit by the side of his king, right, but carry the heraldic banner of the Kingdom of France. So one of the, in the historical record of the time, specifically French medieval historians, they would talk about how upon his death, the banners of France fell. Literally, yes, but also metaphorically, right, for that series of major losses experienced by France. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so Geoffroi de Charny, born about somewhere in the beginning of the 14th century. We don't have an exact date. We know he died in Poitiers. But one of the important things that we want to highlight here is the fact that medieval historians of the time, both French and English, recognize him as an exemplar knight of the kingdom of the realm, of the French realm, right? We have Jean Froissart, which is one of the premier medieval historians of the era. So Froissart and Charny are often read side to side because if Charny is writing about chivalry, Froissart is talking about the actual happenings of the time. He wrote The Most Worthy and Valiant of Them All, Geoffrey Baker, and the Froissart's equivalent in England, for lack of a better term, a knight more skilled in military matters than any other Frenchman. So he was renowned as a military leader, tactician, theoretician of chivalry, and knight. Right? These four things are things that I want you to think about as we talk about chivalry as a philosophical concept. Okay, I'm not spending a ton of time about his biography. You're welcome to read about it. For lack of a better term, for if you're interested in the book that I'm specifically drawing from, it's this one, A Knight's Own Book of Chivalry. It is with an introduction by Richard Cowper and Elspeth Kennedy's translation. The reason I used this one in particular for the purposes of this class is that it not only has a brief biography on the Charny, it also has a historical and cultural context. It also goes into the analysis of the book as well as Charny's book proper. Translated, of course, into English, of course, because none of us, at least I can't read medieval French, but that's a personal thing. Maybe that's a skill issue on my end, who knows? Now, let's talk about the Book of Chivalry proper. So we're going to be discussing these major themes in the Charny, as we talk about Charny's Book of Chivalry. We're going to be talking about prowess, honor, austerity, piety, the worthy knight, and lastly ending with the knighting ceremony. One of the brief things that I want to mention as we continue is to keep this idea, this analysis of good, better, best. We're going to be seeing that over and over in our discussion of the themes of chivalry, because the Charny is a fan of creating, yes, this is good. The things that we are doing when we're looking for prowess, for example, is good. However, a better version of seeking prowess is this. And then lastly, the best way to seek prowess is this, right? Same thing for honor, same thing for the measures of austerity, right? We'll get into that, but keep this in mind of good, better, best. This is kind of escalating. There's a hierarchy here. One of the key items of Charny's philosophy when it comes to chivalry is that there is a hierarchy of worthiness. So that's going to be one of the major themes that we explore and we discuss today. Hi, if you have any questions, we just went over the historical context of where we're writing, middle of 100 Years' War. French are getting their butts handed to them because it's the 1340s and it's not going well. De Charny writes and publishes the Book of Chivalry in 1352. He dies 4 years later in Poitiers. Not great, right? So this is kind of where we're at. So Charny has three crucial questions. Triple C's. Anyway, what are the qualities of worthy knights? So what are the fundamental basics of chivalry? How should a knight behave before, during, and after war? And then lastly, what is the most important chivalric virtue, right? For Charny, the most important chivalric virtue above all is prowess. Now I have a question. When we hear the word prowess, what is the reaction that we hear? Because I already see some faces. Yes?
Don't suck.
Don't suck. What does it mean to not suck, right? What does it mean to be good at something? Do we have any other ideas about what prowess might mean?
Win.
Win
through skill at fighting.
Through skill at fighting. And it's interesting that you mentioned fighting in particular, right? What if prowess could be something else? So these are the main things that Charny is asking himself when he sits down to write the Book of Chivalry. This idea of prowess is followed closely by honor, right? And all of other virtues stem from prowess and honor. As we'll see, we'll deconstruct this idea of prowess because this question, what is prowess, lies at the center of Charny's philosophy. When he sits down and writes his Book of Chivalry, and he writes this idea of a knight must be proud, right? Kind of like what's the knighting ceremony, right? In the Book of Ceremonies that says like a knight must above all things be proud, right? Borrowing from this. But what does it mean to have prowess? When we talk about Charny's philosophy and we talk about the notion of prowess, typically conversations at some point mention this quote: "He who does more is more worthy." Or is worthier, right? You can find this in the section 3 of this Book of Chivalry, by the way. Where I can, I'm going to try to cite as direct references as possible so that in the future you can actually look those up if you want. But this phrase is particularly important because this is where prowess is particularly found. Yes?
Sorry, since you mentioned that quote,
Yeah.
do you have a favorite translation?
I don't have a favorite translation, but for the sake of this class, I'm using Elspeth Kennedy's translation.
Okay.
So that's what I'm using. I've not gotten into the debates between translations. That is relevant, but not directly relevant right now. So I appreciate it though, but this is the one that I'm using.
Nice.
So one of the things for Charny is that prowess, as I've mentioned, is crucial. But what does that mean in particular? Prowess is, yes, skill, yes, not sucking, but it's not just at one thing. When in the SCA, when we talk about prowess, right, we typically talk about skill in whatever thing that person's being highlighted for. Skill in service, skill in arts and sciences, skill in fighting. Yes, however, there's this non-material component to it, right? Yes, we're talking about horseback tactics, ground fighting, but also this idea of hardiness, courage, determination. A knightly level of prowess isn't just the ability to be competitive out in the list field. It's also being somebody who is courageous, who is loyal, right? Who is determined to seek victory. Not victories through nefarious means, but rather through the study of tactics that work best, right? It's developed learnedness. It's wisdom, for lack of a better term. Prowess is the highest virtue in, like, how do I say this? I got my word twisted around. I'm gonna reset. And we're back. Hello, everyone. Prowess is important for Charny because it is full of these things that are material and also immaterial. And what's interesting here is that prowess, yes, it is the effort that one engages in to develop their own skills. But more so than that, prowess is almost a feature of divine grace. For Charny, when you read the Book of Chivalry, there is this constant referencing of Christianity. You cannot separate Charny from Christianity and maintain a cohesive set of philosophy. What I mean by that is that prowess here, it is something granted by God, and therefore for Charny, it is something that requires constant thankfulness, right? You always have to be religious and be thankful to the Christian God to be able to say, thank you for granting me the opportunity for this prowess. Thank you for granting me prowess. And with that, I will use that ability of being in your divine favor to develop my prowess. Now, if you remember, one of the guidelines that I gave you was this kind of good, better, best mentality, right? One of the things that for Charny is important is that there is a hierarchy of prowess. What I mean by that. Charny writes, it is a worthy thing to engage in joust, right? It is a knightly thing to, tilt at the joust. It will give you prowess. However, what will give you better prowess is fighting at the melee, those tournaments, those grand tournaments. Those will give you more prowess because it is not just you and the horse against your opponent, but it is you against many other people. So you have to be mindful of tactics, awareness, being able to fight and consider multiple people at once. But what's even more prow than that, right? The highest level of prowess for the Charny is being able to successfully win at war. The highest deeds of arms can only be found for Charny at war. So this should be giving you the first idea of Charny's core of philosophy, chivalry philosophy here. To be a knight is to fight, yes, but at its highest iteration, it is to fight in war. Knights are warriors, period, end of sentence. Without that, there can be no other virtue. This is what we mean when we say that prowess is the highest virtue, right? All feats of arms are worthy, but some are more worthy than others. This is what we mean, or this is what he means rather, when he goes back and says, he who does more is worthier. It's not doing more in the quantitative sense, in the sense of like, I'm doing all of these things in the SCA, but rather, am I doing the highest things? It's not just, hey, am I doing service and cleaning the kitchen and also picking up 20 chairs at once and also submitting something for the ANS fair and also trying to go to a tournament. It's, am I going to war and am I winning at war because I am the better tactician, right? Am I the best servant during not just times where it's small and it's easy, but in particularly difficult moments like war, right? So this focus on conflict, on higher levels of conflict and war is important. It is so important that for Charny, prowess is the central value. Without prowess, one can never be a knight, period, in a sentence. That's that, right? One acquires prowess through grace and training, but again, there is that hierarchy, right? Doing more is about the true purpose of a knight, war. We cannot have an order of chivalry without war. We cannot have war without an order of chivalry. Now, question. How does this compare with prowess in the SCA? Think back to your immediate gut answers to when I asked what is prowess. Yes, you.
I feel like, at least in terms of the hierarchy, it's kind of flipped.
Yeah. Say more. Say more. What does that mean? Flipped how?
In that we generally put more emphasis on individual prowess, me fighting you, rather than all of us in a melee.
Yeah. What do we think about that?
I agree. Yeah, you agree a lot because in the melee, you're surrounded by a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of things. It's kind of easy to disappear in that, not really stand out. It's like, maybe like, wow, you see the kill that Ivander did over there? That was pretty kick-ass.
Right.
Whereas, you know, like, cool, but so did the 14 other people in his line, all doing something kick-ass at the same time, versus it's a lot more focused in the SCA, purposefully. You know, your crown tournaments, your Christmas tourney, of like, okay, now you've got one person doing something really cool against one other person. I mean, even like expand up to a 3-man melee, you
Right.
can still kind of get that prowess where you're then being able to focus on multiple opponents, but it's a lot more focused on the individual skill that is being displayed.
In the FCA, I think one of the reasons why we consider that individual performance as prowess is because for many of us, we think of having those extra variables of the melee, for example, as things that can introduce error values, right? They can foul up somebody without that person meaning to. It could be, somebody could be doing their best and still the other team does better, right? But what if, and this, like, I'm proposing these questions not to have an answer, but rather to just get those questions going. But what if somebody is able to harness the power of their 20-person unit or 30-person unit or their regional unit and create effectual change in the battlefield? That would be a massive display of prowess, wouldn't it? Right? And for Charny, it would be the higher version of prowess, wouldn't it? Right? So this is an interesting comparison, an interesting tension that we have. We don't need to resolve the tension, but we can notice that it's there. Yes?
I think another part of it is when we have the battlefields, it's like we can't go take the higher ground and sneak around behind them and mine them. We have set conditions that we have to fight in. So
Yeah.
some of our tactics are automatically off the board.
Discounted. That's true. We just can't do it. We can't draw the enemy in a false retreat because there is no false retreat to do, right? So we're constrained by the rules of the society as we have them, right? So that's an excellent point. Yeah. Hello.
But I think then there's also a really large amount of skill in being able to excel within those parameters. Everyone's within, but what do you do with those?
Yeah.
And that's where like the tales of like the dragon's teeth or tooth come from. Like, yes, those are like focused and communicated through verbals or visual tellings to their majesties or highnesses. But like, how do you tactically understand like the win condition, for example? Bridge battles, what's the win condition? Hold the bridge or get the banner on the other side, but you've got 5 minutes doing it. If you put balls to the wall, everything in the first 3 minutes, but then you're gassed for the last 2, whereas your opponent is more reserved and prepared for those final 2 minutes for the big push, then tactically, who wins in the end?
So that's an interesting tension that Charny actually talks about in his Book of Chivalry, right? Like, it's, if we're talking about prowess not just as individual skill, but also the learning of the strategies and tactics that work best, that in and of itself would be a discussion of prowess, right? So it's an interesting kind of back and forth that we have going on here. So moving on, because if not, we're going to keep doing this, which is good. Don't get me wrong. I want this energy. This is the vibe that I'm looking for. But we're looking at the secondary virtue. If prowess is the central virtue for Charny, honor is the second one. How does one acquire honor? Honor grows for somebody through successful feats of arms. I only have feats of legs, and I have hands of arms, but for Charny, he has feats of arms. Thank you, I appreciate your grace. Thank you very much. It's a bad joke, but anyway, moving straight on. Success in arms is only possible through prowess. So we can see here this relationship wherein prowess is the wellspring for everything else, right? According to Charny's kind of arguments, if prowess is a central virtue because from prowess everything derives, honor is one of those things, and one acquires honors through successful feats of arms. However, one is only successful in feats of arms, especially in that like good, better, best hierarchy that I'm talking about, only done through prowess, right? And we only acquire prowess through divine grace and also study. So we're seeing how this relationship starts to kind of develop, right? We're seeing how this is starting to grow and work together, right? Now, here's an interesting thing. Attaining honor is inherently a violent process, right? Attaining honor for a knight needs to be violent. That's the only way to be, right? Remember, the central virtue of a knight is prowess, and the only highest way to get that is through some sort of combat, whether it be joust or it be war preferably for Charny. But right here, what's interesting here is that Charny creates a demarcation, right? It's not just violence. It's not that. It's refinement, right? A knight isn't brutal, right? A knight isn't just hacking and slashing for the sake of it. A knight that goes around devastating the countryside is not a proud knight, maybe not even a worthy knight. Because a knight who engages in that kind of behavior would be more of a brute, like a brute for lack of a better term. Brutality here is the antithesis of prowess. So how do we temper that? Like I mentioned earlier, learning the tactics, learning strategy, learning refinement. The refinement in war. War is not just violence the war is not just violence and upper level tactics. In the ground, or on the ground rather, there is a set of refinement, there is a set of learning that one can demonstrate prowess through the acquisition of military tactics. And once we have a knight that is honorable, that in turn reflects a certain refinement and a certain sense of moral goodness for Charny. Is this making sense? Right? So to be proud is to have honor is to be a morally upstanding knight, right? Prowess brings success, which brings honor. Morality is tied to military action. Dutiful in war, that's the key thing, right? Knights must be warriors, and therefore must die as warriors. Hey, remember when I said that prowess is something given by divine grace, and therefore knights must be eternally grateful to it? Imagine, wouldn't it make sense that a knight always be in conversation, for lack of a better term, with the Christian God? Because hey, if they're dying tomorrow, better to have a good relationship back and forth, huh? Right? Always go through confession. Always make sure that you're to be in good standing with the church, right? Something that's important. Here, in section 19, Charny writes, anyone who wants to attain this high honor, if he retains his physical health and lives for long enough, cannot and should not be excused from achieving it. There is a physical component to it, right? There's a violent component to it, sure, but there is this refinement within that process of violence. Do we have any questions so far? Yes.
So, if honor is only achieved through successful feats of arms,
Yes.
he sees
For knights.
or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or men at arms, rather.
So he sees this as as honor, not as a process, but as something that is accumulated.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. So one of the things I'll talk at the end is that other authors of books of chivalry have a different method, prescribe a different method to achieving social honor, right? Where in, for example, spoilers for Lul, right, who writes about the book of chivalry, honor for him is something that is granted by other knights, right? Or by other nobility. That says nothing about conflict, right? Whereas Charny is like, no. The only way to be an honorable knight is for you to go out and go to war, right? It makes sense. He's in the middle of the 100 Years' War and the French are getting their butt handed to them, right? It's a kind of a philosophical way of saying, like, all right, what is the ideal knight here? What is it that we need? We need somebody who is proud. And that's the only manifestation of an honorable knight here, not these French jack-o'-lanterns who are getting their butts handed to them. You know what I mean? That's what I'm talking about.
So the way that they're
Yeah.
using honor right here almost sounds like it's the good version of renown.
Yeah.
It's not just, I'm going to do this in a good way, but that everyone sees me doing it in a good way.
Right. It's not bragging, but because renown isn't bragging either.
Yeah.
Right? It's that social capital almost of being able to be like, oh, this person was successful militarily. That's something that we need to keep in mind, right? Now, are there any thoughts, comments, questions before we continue? Okay. So one of the major issues that Charny brings up is the idea of comfort, right? And austerity over comfort. For Charny, worthiness as a knight comes with being willing to live a more austere life. This is in reaction, I would say, to seeing how French chivalry are decorating themselves with brocade, with fine linens and clothing, with jewelry and things like that. And he's looking at them. And I'm going to say this in like plain modern English and say, guys, what are we doing over here spending however many ducats, buying fancy shit that we don't need? And also we're losing here. Why is our king having to levy higher taxes to fund this war? And then when the peasants turn around and like see where the money is going, it's going to your newest like import from the Silk Road. What are we doing here? What's going wrong here? And so as a reaction, or rather as a Charny contra comfort, as it were, right? We have Charny prescribing the role of austerity here. The French chivalry is losing to the English because of their commitment to comfort and wealth, cozy beds, sleeping in, fine foods. Listen, I like a good steak and waking up at noon. I like it. It's nice. That being said, maybe that's probably not the best way to wage war, right? Like, that makes sense to me. Now, here's an interesting thing from Charny. Men who dress in finery and relax and sleep in cozy beds and sleep in late lack honor because they lack shame. Because if you had shame, you would be made aware intrinsically that your role as a knight is failing. You are failing your role as a knight because you are losing out on opportunities of prowess. You are wasting your time getting all these finery things, and all of a sudden, the evidence is the fact that we're losing so many battles. So how dare you not have any shame? As a result, you are shameless and you lack honor. Right? For Charny, this is a big accusation. As a quick biographical fact, Charny was captured during a battle during the 100 Years' War, and the immense guilt and shame he felt, right, at being captured by the English and then having to be ransomed, right, probably informed this chapter here, right? He was embarrassed. Like, what do you mean I got captured, right? I shouldn't do that. I'm a knight. I'm better than that. Here we are, right? Seek ye not adornment, but honor through prowess. Now, this is a fun one. Charny, instead of being like chaste, you know, like a good knight must never touch a woman, that kind of nonsense. He's like, no. Actually, women are actually really important. Because here's the thing. If a knight be of good renown and of good honor, a good standing, right, a worthy person, then his wife, right, or his lady, because Charny is never against casual sex, but, you know, in moderation, right? A knight's lady will have her heart swell when her lover is seen and known as a valiant knight, and droops when her man is ignored because his prowess and honor are low. Can you imagine, right, dating a knight, and then he just is always kind of at the outskirts of a battle and always just never really in the thick of it, and he walks into court and you're like, yep, that's my man. You're gonna have to deal with that, right? It's a bit of a sexist argument, I understand, but we live in a sexist society, so we're gonna have to deal with that, with what it is. That being said, here's some questions for the group. Now, what is the argument Charny is making here about the duty of knights? Which is an easy one. It's a little bit of a softball question for you. But next, do we agree? Why or why not? Meaning, are knights warriors first and warriors only? Is a knight's job to live in more austere conditions and seek prowess above all things? How do we feel about that? Do we agree? Third question, what is the relationship between honor and shame? Pretty easy one there. But fourth question, how does this compare with our expectations for peerage within the SCA? We can tackle this at any rate. We don't have to answer all of them, but these are questions for us to marinate about. Let's start with something a little bit closer to home. This fourth one. How does this discussion of austerity, of prowess, of honor, how does this resonate within our own expectations and observations of peerage orders within the SCA? I'm going to say this because there are peers in this room, and it's my classroom, and I'm going to say there is no wrong answer. There is no SCA heresy here that is too heretical. We can have an honest conversation about this. Right, Your Grace? Yeah, great. So, thoughts?
It seems that virtue is virtue is virtue is virtue. And we may rank order our virtues differently, but someone who's living according to Charny's ideal will be seen as virtuous regardless of those circumstances. Even if somebody is full on to Charny here in the SCA, that may not be the most prudent direction, but I don't think anyone would say it's a bad one.
What do we think? Geoffrey, I see you have some thoughts.
Being in the society for as long as I have, and as a third generation here, I've been surrounded by the hundreds of peers of different flavors, and something you hear a lot. And if you're newer to the society, you may hear the idea of a peer saying, okay, I'm here now. Now the real work begins. Like once they get the whoopee, it's not done. They have to continue deserving it or earning it. That's not really a thing because they were recognized for it, so they've gotten it. But they have to continue deserving it because something I think about a lot is if peer A comes up and demands something, not ask, demand something. I'm like, why should I listen? Why do you expect my respect for you if you're demanding something from me? A, we're in a game.
Right.
Let's be real here. It's a game. It's a hobby. And the SCA peerages are a social construct, just like that gets super philosophical in society.
Yeah, sure.
Everything's a social construct. We agree that white belt means something. If you start doing something that results in you not necessarily deserving that, mentally it's like, okay, now you're just a brown belt to me. Like you say something despicable, or like that changes my mind forever about you, or you do some heinous act. You're like, you're no longer worthy of that belt. You can wear it, but the social construct of my brain is like, no. It's like, so I think recognizing that the job is never done. The job has to continue even after you get the whoopee. You have to continue deserving it every day, not even necessarily at events. Like something I get told as, both an apprentice and a squire is, be careful what you say, be careful of your actions, who you're around. Even if you're not just on the field, if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, that can set you back. Always think about your position, your social gain as well. Think about all these things and how they contribute towards being a peer and being viewed as a peer.
Interesting. Yes.
I think in part of the society, they put the peer to expect them to look the part when they come peers. But on the other hand, if they're also busy shopping and enjoying the fine food and stuff, and they miss the entire battlefield, like the shiv or the bodge show the battle pinned because they're all hungover, that would cause some problems.
That would. Yeah, the gossip would happen, wouldn't it?
Yes.
It's interesting, right? Because I'm thinking of what has been said so far, and there's an element of virtue ethics in the conversation of like you always have to keep earning it, right? Virtue is virtue is virtue. You still have to live up to the expectations, right? The sense of like you are duty and moral bound to do these things, which is similar to the Charny. However, this here has a little bit more of a nihilistic element, I think, compared to what Charny is talking about. Because what I mean by that is that there's a tacit understatement within this conversation about, we can all choose to not be here too, right? For Charny, there is no other option, right? For Charny's philosophical worldview depends on the chivalry existing as an important order of society. We'll get into that here in a second. So Charny makes some really interesting claims about the superiority of the chivalry over like monastic orders, but we'll get to that here in a second. But there's an interesting thought line here, isn't there? Because in the other part too is I think I forget who mentioned it. We expect our peers to look a certain way. Was that you, I believe? Yes. We expect our peers to look a certain way in the sense of when we're looking at potential candidates, there's a question of like, all right, do they look the part, right? And for Charny, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's one of the things that matter least, right? Like, sure, like dressing like wools and linens and stuff like that. We'll get to the knighting ceremony at the end and like talk about like there are fine fabrics being used, but it's not the most important thing. So for Charny, like if I showed him somebody in particular garb that's a little ratty, it's a little well-worn, however, they are a consummate student of fighting and tactics, and they show up to joust, the melee, and war, right? But they don't look the best, but their armor is well-worn, and they're always out there, and they're a loyal servant at the mid-range. That would be a higher peer than the best tournament fighter who dresses in silk and nothing else, right? So there's an interesting argument being made here. Given the context of 100 Years' War, it makes sense. Do we have any other thoughts, Kyle? Or about any other things here? Yes?
I thought, just compare centuries ago, how they conducted themselves in warfare versus within the context of SCA war. How they conducted the war was also thought of as not just chivalrous, but honorable, how they met their opponent on the field. And I wonder how if there's effort, at least at the discussion level within the chivalry of how they conduct themselves, leading their people on the field within SCA wars.
I'm not gonna reveal state secrets, but what I am
I have
gonna
my thoughts, but.
yeah, but I am
Great.
gonna say that leadership is a favorable quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You don't go from a backfield and come up the rear flank in history.
Yeah.
Because that was seen as kind of like,
Oh, it depends, right? Because for many people, you
Yeah.
shouldn't use archers, and then the English were doing a really good job.
right, but you know what I mean, it was more, meet them in the front,
Right,
face to face, that kind of thing,
Sure, makes sense.
to be tested.
Right. To
If
meet.
he's in the middle of, he would have lived through a couple of decades of the Chevauché, right?
Mm-hmm. He was
So-
darn good at it too.
So his opinions on brutality are probably informed by that.
Absolutely. Yeah. For Charny, it's not go out there, meet them, and hack and slash. It's let's time it so that we win, right? And how do we win? Because we understand how historically the best tacticians have done it. Is there a question? Okay.
No, just the bit on brutality.
Yeah.
Triggered my memory because the Chevauché was not nice.
No, it wasn't. War isn't nice, right? And there's always that threat of you're going to die probably, and we'll get to that bit in a second. So give me a second. But yes. So moving on. This is actually where we started to get into like the sense of piety, religion, dying, all of these things. Reminder, here, prowess comes from God and is virtue granted unto men of arms. The Book of Chivalry contains these two parallelisms throughout. There is always this mention of religion. Like, again, Christianity is inexorable from this text. We cannot understand the text without understanding Christianity. And within the text, we see an interesting set of parallelisms happening. Much like in Christianity, there is a separation between the body and the spirit, right? Where one must prepare the spirit for eternal life and salvation and stuff like that, accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, all that jazz. Modern denominations aside, right? The general vibe is Jesus Christ is kind of important, being very facetious here. But what's important here is that there's this other parallelism going on here. Whereas, like the body is less important compared to the eternal spirit for Christianity, broadly, the material comforts of man are less important compared to one's honor. So we see this kind of parallelism here, right? The main duty of knights is to seek prowess and grow prowess and use that prowess to engage in successful chevauchés or military actions, right? Whether it be from the joust all the way to war to achieve higher honor. And what's interesting here is that there's this theme of sacrificing the body over and over and over again, right? The Charny talks often and at length about how difficult it is to be a knight because it is constant, daily, putting your body on the line, not just for injury, but permanent disfigurement, permanent injury, and ultimately death, right? So we see this language of like bodily self-sacrifice, one might say martyrdom, happening in the Book of Chivalry. Charny constantly is going on and on about how knights are almost like martyrs for Christ, right? And martyrs for chivalry, right? Now, it's kind of important, isn't it? Because we can't talk about prowess without talking about sacrifice. I mean, we see it in the SCA too, right? If you want to be a martial peer, you have to go out there. You have to do the thing, and you have to embrace the suck. In fact, I would argue that if you want to be any kind of peer, you have to go out there and embrace the suck. Even for our newest order of like the mark, right? There are going to be days where you're archer, you're tired, your back is sore, it's really hot, you're staring into the sun, and this sucks, it's not fun. But dang it, if I'm gonna be better, this is how I do it, right? And you can see it throughout. Now, a knight must be devout Christian at all times, but we've been talking about Christianity this whole thing. Now, very easy. I was going to speak Spanish for a second. Softball pitch. There we go. That's the word I wanted to say. Question: Why must a knight be a devout Christian consistently? Not just like on Sundays, not just on Easter, not just on the high holidays. But why is it important spiritually?
I think if you're taking Charny's things, that prowess comes from God, and therefore you must constantly be thanking Him for that if you want to continue to have prowess, and be thankful for that. And if you're going to die maybe in 30 minutes, it might be a good idea.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Joe. So what's interesting here, right, is that Charny is also grappling with a broader, like, medieval philosophy question that exists during that time and has existed for a while, which is this bottom one right here, right? How do we reconcile the teachings of Christianity, right, turning the other cheek, peace and like love thy neighbor and feeding the people who cannot feed for themselves, right? The whole bread and fishes thing, right? That was a big deal. How do we reconcile that with the de facto violence of knighthood? That's a question, right? How do we reconcile Christianity and all of its teachings with the fact that being a knight and acquiring prowess is fundamentally and inexorably a violent endeavor? You are killing people. That's your job.
To they go to war, they fight, they kill.
Yeah.
In the defense of those they protect. Because if you don't, then this enemy army comes through and it sweeps your nation, your motherland, and then you're all gone. Versus what you do through the grace of God, through prowess and honor, could be considered evil if you wanted it to be, but at the very least violent. But you are bearing that burden, that sacrifice for others.
Interesting. The sacrificial lamb is really resonating here. I did find it interesting, before I get to you, I did find it interesting that there was a little bit of a hiccup between violence and evil, right? I don't disagree, but the counter question to that, just to push you because I like where you're going, is how, like, is violence inevitable, right? Because we have all these notions about human nature, which, by the way, the notion of human nature has fundamentally changed over the past few centuries. I digress. But it is important to note, right, that like, yeah, this like evil kingdom in the future, in the distant lands, right. I mean, it's the English, so like it's fine. But is there a Christian pacifist way to deal with them, right? Could there have been? There's not an objective answer because we don't know, but that's the exercise, right, of reconciling the fact that like, hey, both sides here are Christian, right? We're not fighting in the Crusades. We're fighting against two Christian kingdoms. So there's not like an ideological conflict, right? So it's an interesting kind of back and forth. There's a tension here, right? That remains largely unresolved for Charny, but that's also because this is a larger question that any one person can answer in the Middle Ages. So there's that. Sorry, really quick. Yes.
I'll say, medieval philosophy, God put you where you are, so he made you a knight to be obedient to the king. The king is anointed by God. So by being obedient to what the king says, you are following your God's given path.
I find it fascinating how medieval Christian philosophy borrows so extensively from Plato's Republic, wherein the argument is that people are born naturally into set hierarchies. Right? But no, fantastic argument, perfectly in line within medieval philosophy. So that makes sense. Now, there's a question here that we haven't attended, but we're getting close. Oh, not yet. Never mind, I got ahead of myself. So, I borrowed from another book that Charny wrote called the Book of Charny. Called The Good Order of Knighthood should be considered the most rigorous order of all, especially for those who uphold it well and conduct themselves in a way in keeping with the purpose for which the order was established. This is a really interesting argument for Charny, because Charny is making the philosophical argument that morally, existentially, like ontologically, what I'm saying, and like from a Christian perspective, the order of chivalry is more important than the mendacious orders of various friars that exist in Christendom. What I mean by that is that the Franciscans and the Dominicans and all that stuff, they're great. Love them, good, but remember that hierarchy of good, better, best, right? It is good to be a God-fearing person. It is great to be a monk. However, it is even better to be a knight. And the reason for that is because monks are spending all that time like discussing the Bible and writing things down and making copies. Great. None of them are dying. None of them are dying for their God. None of them are dying to uphold the sacred order of things, right? Remember that whole thing about prowess is done through risk. He who does more is more worthy, right? This is a natural conclusion, or logical conclusion rather, of like, if we view worthiness, right, and if we view service to Christianity, the Christian God, as part of this endeavor of a knight, knights do it and also risk their lives constantly, then they are more worthy in Charny's view than the order of like the monastic orders. Again, they all have their places. It's not that they're bad. Remember, good, better, best, not bad, good, better. Does that make sense? So it's an interesting, somewhat conflictive argument, I would say, wouldn't it? Something to think about, something to let marinate. Now, he also writes in section 40 of this book here, hardships, pains, discomforts, fears, perils, broken bones, and wounds, which the good knights have to suffer frequently, there is no religious order in which as much is suffered. That's what I was mentioning, isn't it? Right? The men, like all the monks in the world, none of them are going to fight compared to knights. Period. End of sentence. And therefore, knights are more worthy. Oof. Interesting argument.
And the only thing, like the Templars had nothing that long, wasn't it like in 1300, 1305?
The Templars were disbanded before Charny was alive.
I know.
Yeah,
Not in his lifetime.
Yeah.
But it hadn't been that long. I wonder what he would have thought of the militant order.
Good question, isn't it? Yeah. Well, one of the things that we know is that at least in Iberia, once the Templars were disbanded, a lot of the fortifications on the southern border of the Christian kingdoms were abandoned, right? So, it's an interesting question of what he would have
Maybe
thought.
some cultural regret going on.
Maybe. Or maybe it's this sense of like, well, now we don't have the numbers, and so there's that. Or this idea of, oh, these Knights Templars, because we all know that one of the reasons that they became disbanded was because they got a little too wealthy for their own good. Maybe. There's a question here about Charny being like, were they focused more on serving chivalry or were they focused more on building their wealth? Then are they truly worthy? It's a hard question to ask, isn't it?
No clear answer.
I think some of the Franciscans walking around in winter with no place to sleep might argue with the discomfort and pains.
Right? Yeah, no, it is interesting, right? Because absolutely, monastic orders who take ascetic vows, right? Those vows of absolute poverty, who risk winter. There is an issue here. However, for Charny, not saying I'm saying this, but for Charny, would there then be a difference between risking life and limb through the vicissitudes of the weather versus going out and meeting violence where it is?
Conflict.
Yeah. So there's a hierarchy here, even still.
There's no prowess in.
There's no prowess in dying by winter.
Yes.
Suck less.
Go inside.
Yeah, go inside. Go inside, Geoffroi de Charny. So we come to this question
Really though.
that I wanted to highlight because we still have a little bit of time. Yeah, we have time. So how do we reconcile violent sports? How do we reconcile violence and activities within quote the Middle Ages as they should have been? Which is to say, when we talk about the SCA as the Middle Ages as they should have been, what does that mean? Is there an inherent meaning to that? Because I'm going to take the position, for the sake of this class, that the phrase "the Middle Ages as they should have been" is a fundamentally meaningless phrase. Because what does "should" mean?
Subjective.
Is there an inherent essential quality that the Middle Ages should have had and we can maintain, or that we can impose into our celebration of the Middle Ages, while also divorcing the Middle Ages from the various pieces of structural and interpersonal violence that built it? Because do we have a Middle Ages without the burning and sacking of Rome? Do we have a Middle Ages without the Crusades? Do we have a Middle Ages without the Spanish Inquisition? Right? So this is a difficult question. What does the Middle Ages as they should have been mean? And how do we reconcile the fact that we do engage in violent activity here?
Well, I think to a certain point, yes, it is a meaningless sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, every meaning behind that sentence is just as valid as any other one.
But if everything is valid, that means nothing is not valid. Therefore, that doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's like one of those things that we all just kind of accept that it is a vague vibe that we're all sort of agreeing on.
Yeah, moderately, like we're trying to be nice, right?
Yeah, and we're trying to impose our understanding of morality onto the Middle Ages.
We have this thing,
What does that mean? What is that?
the anti-bullying policy.
The anti-bullying policy.
Anti-bullying policy.
I mean, I'll take it, right? So yeah, what is? This is a question for y'all not to answer now because we don't have the time nor space nor like resources to do it. But I think a good question for y'all to ask yourselves as you exist within the SCA is what does "should have been" mean? Because here's the thing. One of the things that we can't talk about, or that we should talk about, and that we don't talk about often enough, is that the Middle Ages and the pre-modern era, the Renaissance era and stuff like that, was largely funded by genocide and colonization, right? Like, we can't talk about the glory of Spain without the taking of the Kingdom of Granada in 1492, and then using that money to go over to the Americas and genociding the indigenous population. There is no other way around it, right? So how do we reconcile these things? This isn't a question to answer, but I want you to marinate on it. Because when we think of, I think one of the virtues here, one of the big lessons of Charny here, is teaching us fundamentally that we have to grapple with these difficult themes that are inherent to the things that we want to do, and how do we reconcile that with what we want to be, right? So, anyway, moving on. How are we feeling? Are we feeling good? Are you feeling like moderately depressed about it, or are we okay? Okay, we're good? All right. Making sure. So, one of the things that I wanted to mention here, that I really wanted to highlight, because we've been talking about religion a lot, but here. Religiosity and chivalry are co-constitutive parts of each other, meaning that we cannot have one without the other. We cannot have medieval society without one or the other, according to Charny, right, in his philosophical argument. Chivalry is essentially necessary and essentially needs to be a Christian order, right? Without Christianity, we cannot have the chivalry as we know it for Charny, right? And within that, the good knight, much like Christ, right, and much like the martyrs of Christian history, are sacrificing their bodies over and over in favor of God's will, right? They're trying to win his approval. They're trying to develop prowess in these regards. No other order can do this. The monastic orders may be holy and high, but they're not out there on horses. You know what I mean? So there's that. So there's this sense of power and self-sacrifice in the order of knighthood. That's what creates this kind of sense of superiority for Charny, right? It's the ability to go out and do something. Do we see, by the way, I wanted to briefly highlight because I really want to make sure that we get this. Do we see how practical Charny's advice is? His philosophy is about doing. It isn't about finding ideal types of what a knight should be and what a knight was and how it's fallen from grace, but rather, if we're going to have worthy knights, then they need to do X, Y, Z. That makes sense? It's very much, we're doing this thing. That's something that I wanted to highlight. So what's interesting here is that if we're talking about prayers and war cries at the same time in the 100 Years of War, then when we have a society that goes to war, like ours, like the SCA, right? War, quotation marks, right? We're not a religious society. We have laws in place that says we cannot have an established religion. We can have religious ceremony, we can have religious objects, but nobody can be forced to witness them, right? Because we want to avoid that, the 100 Years War, amongst the other things. Remember that conversation about the Middle Ages should have been? Interesting, right? Anyway, now, here's a question. How do we fit the chivalry? Because ultimately, this is what we're talking about. How do we fit the chivalry in our society that is fundamentally secular, but flirts with religion, right? What about the other peerages, right? Where do the laurels have standing in this? What about the pelicans? What about the mods, like masters of defense? What about the marks, like the Jaegers, right? It's an interesting thing. It's a difficult question.
I think it has more to do with how we view prowess versus how Charny does. Because for him, prowess is only about action and violence for betterment in joust, melee, war. And
don't forget the emotional and mental parts of that, right? Courage, determination.
Right.
Yeah.
Which are secondary to his belief of that martial might.
I would rather, sorry, let me correct you there. It's not that they're secondary, it's that they're both related. It's that you can't have martial might without those.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I mean with that is that prowess is physically manifesting as war and successful deeds of arms, but you cannot have that without courage, determination, hardiness.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
I took it more, if you engage in one and are successful,
Yes.
you have the others.
Right.
That's
Can't.
so when I say secondary, isn't that it is respected or treated as lesser, but that without the primary, you don't establish and build the secondaries.
Sure.
And so I think as far as the society is concerned, because all of our peerages are not martial based, we view prowess through a significant different lens.
Yeah.
All the orders strive for greatness, but they strive for greatness in different manners.
It's interesting too, that I'm going to get to you in a quick second. I find it interesting that nobody has mentioned yet that the SCA is also, unfortunately and unfortunately, influenced by a larger social forces that exist outside of the SCA. What I mean by that is that we have a tendency in our society to look at each other as a series of individuals rather than a collective whole, right? So what I mean by that is imagine a worldview, if you will, that instead of viewing ourselves as individuals sitting together, rather, Instead, we have a series of orders represented here. We have the order of the high nobility, right, with the baron and like the other peers, right? And we have the peasantry, for lack of a better term, sorry y'all. But we also have the monastic orders that maybe could be pelicans, right? Maybe. But we have so instead of, if what would change about our conceptions of prowess and our conceptions and our grappling with this conversation if we had a different worldview, right? Then that resulted in us not looking at us through at this conversation or informing the SCA through the lens of individualism. Let me rephrase that. What would happen if the SCA existed in a society, right, whose cultural forces led towards collective orders in, as a method of grouping people, rather than that Western style individualism, right? So that's an interesting question. How might that change? We don't have to answer it yet, but I do want to let that marinate. Yes?
Can you flip that question in
Sure.
some ways and ask, how would de Charny have viewed chivalry if he lived in a society where individualism had more value?
That's a great question. Absolutely. What do we think? That's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
I keep thinking about all of this that you talk about in context, outside of the 100 Years' War and the situation France was in.
Yeah.
De Charny's view of chivalry would likely have been very, very different.
Yes.
Because it is all built on where you are, and so separating the viewpoint from the context in which it is built, it's impossible. We can't have the same view of chivalry because we don't live in that context. We can
Evidence
try to understand it, but we
Right.
can't have it.
Evidenced by the other books of chivalry prioritizing different virtues. Yeah.
The way that we view chivalry
Would he
today.
want it more like Lou, then?
Maybe.
I think his good, better, best would just be restructured.
Maybe.
If it wasn't taking place during the 100-Year War, maybe the best is not worth it.
Yes.
That could be seen as excessive as far as loss of life or resource. But to show individual supreme prowess in jousting.
Right. We'd flip that order. Did I cut you off and never get back to you? I wanted to make sure.
Kind of changed the subject or went off in a different way, but
Okay.
I said,
I'm
reading the
sorry.
book about honor.
Yeah.
It said that in the 19th century, honor changed in the Victorian era to be more like, I believe I'm an honorable person by my belief system, which mine, but prior to that, it was the belief system of the whole which defined what honor was, if you're doing what society said you should be.
Interesting. It's a kind of a non-material way to maintain social cohesion, right? Yeah. Sorry for cutting you off, by the way. Thank you for telling me still. I appreciate it. Okay. Coming back to this. So, I guess one of the questions that we can ask is, what role does peerage have in this conversation of sacrifice? Because remember, this whole thing that Charny's talking about when it comes to piety and religiosity and stuff like that, is through the lens of sacrifice. Knights are sacrificing their bodies upon the altar of prowess, as it were, right? What about other peerages? Right? Are they doing something similar? Or are they sacrificing themselves elsewhere? Or what does sacrifice mean for the other peerages? Or what does sacrifice mean for chivalry? In the context of the SCA.
Regardless, it's all viewed as striving towards an objective independent of one another. In other words, laurels have their objectives achieved in striving to be the great craftsmen, for example, or the pelicans being great service leaders. Above and beyond the rest of the populace, that's how we get recognized for that over many years of toil.
But I think,
Still toil and striving for that, whether it's martial or service.
Yeah.
I think what needs to be focused on is there's some, to put a different wording is, what's the consequence of achieving a peerage? The consequence of knighthood is sometimes you need body rebuilding,
Just ask Brock,
physical
right?
therapy or surgeries or stuff. Say pelican, you're sacrificing the consequence is your time. But for any peerages,
Mental and emotional energy too.
and emotional energy, and that's for your relationships, in real life. Like, you have to have that conversation with your partner if you have one of like, I'm gonna be spending a lot of time doing this, a lot of money on this hobby, this thing, because it contributes towards that thing, between the traveling, exposing yourself. Each thing has some consequence.
Sacrifice and toil,
Yeah.
hardship.
You, Grace, you had your hand up.
I wanted to focus in on the word or, because was used,
Mhm.
chivalry or knighthood or service
Mhm.
or this. I think one of the things when you are pursuing peerage with the SCA that you are sacrificing is the ability at that moment in time to pursue any other peerage.
Mm.
It is very hard to walk paths simultaneously.
Yeah.
You have to decide, this is how I choose to spend my time. This other thing is really, really fun and I enjoy it, but I cannot do it right now.
So you sacrifice potential. Right.
You may be able to come back to it, you may not.
Right.
You have to make a choice.
So it can also be a hard choice. It's a good point. I like this discussion, folks. I really appreciate it. Did you have?
There was one thing I was like kind of mentioned is
Okay.
that like a lot of the Chinese like self-sacrifice seems to be like for in favor of God's will,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in like a more modern context, more for other people or
Yeah.
like our own goals.
Right. Like there's a different dimension. It is no longer in the SCA. It's not a theological sacrifice, right? It's very much a social and cultural one. Exactly. Yes. And then there's the sacrificing of potential, of the bodily capacity, right? Of finances, of mental energy and emotional energy, because we live in an economic system that requires that, right? The nobility did not. The nobility had their stuff paid for by the peasant levies, and like whatever trade was coming in and like personal stuff, but like largely it wasn't. Knights didn't have to clock into a 9 to 5, ask for PTO, like, hey, I'm gonna be off for the next 2 weeks, so I'm gonna go over to Poitiers and like do a thing. So there's that. So, by the way, we don't have to answer all of these questions, but I am gonna make these available for like notes if anybody wants them, just to like think about them and just have them there. All right, now we've already discussed this, so in the interest of time, we're gonna keep going. But I wanted to revisit this question again because do we see how like this question might take on a different flavor after we've discussed, before we discuss religion and after we discuss religion, we're gonna move on. So in the interest of time. So as a reminder, worthiness, folks, is a scale, much like prowess, right? Good, better, best, right? For morality, moral, like for it to be a worthy person from a moral standpoint, they must emerge, according to Charny, from simple-minded goodness and the formalities of charity to being able to have genuine service and love for God. Meaning, in the SCA, we see this all the time, right? The people who like show up and do some service and it's like fine, but it's like service in the sense of like, they're kind of rote, kind of like on automatic, on autopilot, like, yeah, I'll just pick up a few chairs and just kind of move on. Or like, yeah, I'll move on to some hay bales, blah, 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 blah. How do we emerge from that to genuine service and love for the society? Is there a difference, right? There's a place for all of that, good, better, best, right? But what does best look like in the context of the SCA? Hard question. Second, for Charny, intelligence, right? From malicious intelligence to subtle intelligence to finally being able to be knowledgeable about make good and reasonable decisions, right? Study, wisdom, logic, philosophy, the classics, right? Being able to study the military tactics, being able to study the best authors, the best thinkers, the best theologians, right? And lastly, valor and deeds of arms. From deservedly individual acts of valor to finally mature military action following good leaders, to becoming finally a wise leader. This is a really easy example to make in the SCA, by the way. Give you a really easy example of Pensic, right? There's a difference between the renown of somebody who breaks from the front line, goes and smashes the front line of the other team, gets killed, goes to res and comes back like, hey guys, I'm back, I did it. And people are like, man, that was awesome, right? Two, all right, Mid-Rome General is telling us to do this thing. I'm gonna do it well, right? I'm gonna do that thing. We took our unit and we did the thing, we captured the objective. Great. To finally being able to say, actually, what we need is to maneuver this way so that we can create a false thing here, and then we can create an anvil here, and then the other. Do we see that hierarchy, right? Good, better, best, right? We can see it in art, can't we? Right? Hey, this person did a really cool replica of a thing. I'm gonna try to match that replica, right? To, okay, there's this replica here and I like it, and like that's the goal, but I'm gonna actually kind of do it this way and kind of use these different materials and this different technique. Two, finally, actually, I saw this thing that was found in a burial mound, so I recreated it from scratch, right? We see that good, better, best. Does that make sense? Yeah, right? How does that look like in service? Here's an example, maybe. Let's think about this. How do we feel about this? From, hey, I helped wash dishes at an event. Great, love that. Thank you very much for doing it. To, hey, I actually organized the team that like did feast and like cleanup for the event. To, hey, I'm actually helping multiple events and teaching them how to be better, more efficient, like how to run their event more efficiently, right? Do we see that good, better, best? That's what Charny's talking about. Reminder, worthiness is a scale, folks. Right. The most worthy is a prud'homme. Sorry, I'm French. I butcher it. I apologize. I'm not French. But in sections 24 and 25, Charny talks about being a prud'homme, which is a worthy man. A worthy knight is a worthy man. Worthiness, like prowess, is aspirational. We must work towards it at all things. Consequently, right, the corollary of that, of worthiness being an aspirational thing, is that timidity is the enemy of prowess. For one to be proud in whatever endeavor they choose, they must not be scared of it. Or, better yet, to quote the great Ned Stark from Game of Thrones, first up, the only time a man can be brave is when they are scared, right? Take that fear. Don't be timid. Send it. Do that thing, right? And lastly, one of the things that I mentioned that I wanted to bring back, renown, right? For Charny, it is important that chivalric orders occasionally recount their deeds and have those written down, right? Not to brag, but it is a list of these are the things that I've aspired to do and that I've done. And this is the evidence of the worthiness that I have, of my worthiness as a knight. I'm not trying to brag, because bragging is going around being like, yeah, because I did, like, I want to say a thing. Like those people, either in whatever community in the NCA, that like, whenever you talk to them, they're only talking about the cool thing that they did 5 years ago. Yeah, those are the braggadocios. The person who is worthy for Charny is a person who lets others speak for him. Like, for example, his now Count, Sasha, right? He did single combat on the field of Penzig right before a war so that we could get an advantage. Everybody saw that, and everybody was recounting that at some point. There's a video of it and everything. It's really, really cool. He didn't go around being like, yeah, because when I beat that one guy, because he liked me and then I hit him back. He doesn't do that. He lets others speak, right? Same thing here. Right? The worthy knight is a worthy man because he doesn't brag about his goals and his worthiness. He lets it speak for itself. Contrasting with unworthiness. Worthy knights are loyal. Unworthy knights, perhaps unsurprisingly, not loyal. But what are we loyal to? Chivalry, above all. Not a king, not their majesties. Chivalry. Right? The ideal worthy knight for Charny is loyal to chivalry above all things. Right? And if you are being a poor knight, you must be shamed for it. Hence that logbook too, by the way. It's not just about being able to say, hey, I've aspired to all of these things, but also, hey man, your name is not coming up in like 5 years worth of documentation. What's up? Kind of sucking. You need to do a little bit better here, right? Now, really quick, I wanted to mention the knighting ceremony. Because I like the knighting ceremony in the sense that I think it's a really cool microcosm of the values of chivalry per that book. Here's the really interesting. It's a semi-religious process for Charny. You can read about it in section 36. So the night before, you confess. You attend confession, so you maintain purity of the soul. You take a bath, a long bath, and like it represents the purity of the body, right? You're preparing both yourself, body and soul, to do these things. You engage in sleep, kind of like resting after an arduous trial, right? You get dressed in, specifically, according to Charny, a white belt, white tunic linen, white undertunic linens, and then a red surcoat, black and brown hosen, because black and brown, by the way, because from the earth you came and to the earth you shall return, yeah? And a red cloak of humility, humility that weighs down upon all of us, that must for all worthy knights. You attend mass, and after mass, you get granted your spurs and sword. Your spurs, must be gold. Now there is an interesting symbolism, one might say, to the fact that somebody who aspires to highest levels of chivalry and worthiness, and as part of that is taking this vow of austerity over comfort, that they are choosing to take something so precious as gold and just keep it on the dirt, right? It's a symbolic representation of gold is not as important to me as it is chivalry, right? And lastly, sword, a double-edged sword. By the sword you shall live, and by the sword you shall die. Period, end of sentence. Now, and lastly, you swear your oath and the collet. The collet, by the way, could be a buffet but the buffet is historically a little bit undefined. It could be the dubbing of the sword, right? Or it could be a little like tap, could be a smooch, depending on some sources, or it could also be a whole slap, right? I got smacked in the face. I specifically requested it, so that's me. However, Charny goes a little further and has one of the coolest quotes that I think about 3 reasons into chivalry. Now, this is the summary, but if you will indulge me, I would like to read it for you, please. Now, it can be held that there are 3 different ways of entering the order of knighthood. Some may choose to enter it when young, so that they can strive longer without fear and without sparing their bodies or possessions in all of the services and conditions which can and should pertain to knighthood. Others want to have the order of knighthood so that people will say that they are knights, and so they will receive greater attention and honor than they did before, but they do not want to fulfill the true conditions and services of knighthood. For that reason, it might be said of these men that they may well have the order of knighthood, but not the reputation of being a knight, for men may have the order who are not real knights. Woof. Lastly, there are also some ancient men of worth who want to spend their old age and end their days in the order of knighthood. They want to enter at this advanced age, and they can indeed do so in keeping with the estate of knighthood, for they should have more sense and judgment than the young, and all the qualities of maturity and virtuous living ought in them. And the code continues about like how the older knights can give comfort and wisdom and all that stuff. But I found it very interesting that Charny is straight up calling out the chivalry and saying, yeah, there are people who get knighted and who are young and they're willing to do the thing and they're active and stuff like that. There are people in the chivalry who are, yeah, sure, they are technically knights, but they're not knightly in the slightest, right? That is one hell of a call out. I wonder, flirting with some danger here, I wonder what would happen if I went around in the SCA and said, hey, some of you may have a white belt, but some of you ain't knights. Yeah. This conversation has an underpinning to it. The question of, is a peer made or is a peer recognized? Because there is a fundamental difference between the two. If a peer is recognized, then they were already a peer in this kind of existentialist sense. However, if a peer is made, then that person, regardless of their capacity, virtue, and worthiness, are not a peer until that moment when they are made a peer. So, we don't have to answer this question now, but I wonder, in your heads, is a peer made or is a peer recognized? I'm going to say, because I'm one, I can do that, man. Wipe out privileges, all right? I think peers are made more so than they are recognized. There can be a convalescence of the two. There are people who like, man, yeah, if it was going to happen to anyone, it should happen to you. Hell yeah. But there are people in our society, as in Charny's society, that have peerages, and I don't think that they are peer-like, right? We don't have to name names. We don't have to talk about it. This is as far as we're going to take this conversation. But interesting how practical Charny is in directly stating that, right? Fascinating that this is an argument and a conversation that has been happening since 1352, and it's the year of our Lord 2026. Yes?
I think then, just like today, there's this ideal that you strive for and hope that it becomes.
Yeah.
And then there's somewhere in between part of that and reality.
Sure.
So, but it's never like perfect.
Right.
And it never will be.
No.
Because we're human.
Right. And what's interesting too is that first off, you're absolutely correct. And secondly, not only like you're correct in the sense that
But if you don't have ideals, then reality just kind of makes things more watered down.
Sure. Well, what I was
I mean, that's just my opinion.
fair. I mean, oh, I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm good. We have
Okay,
short time.
We got it. So Charny, by the way, in the Book of Chivalry, talks about like historical figures of the Bible, like Judas of Maccabee, right? Which in his mind are like the perfect knights, right? They're the best possible iterations of chivalry. And even then, those people had failings, right? They made mistakes. They had vices and they committed sin. That's okay, right? It's not about whether or not somebody is morally perfect, but rather whether or not they are worthy and how the ways in which somebody engages in developing that worthiness, right? So it's an interesting conversation.
Right.
All right, we're pretty much done, by the way. I'm gonna have this slide and like one or two more, but for new knights, by the way, this is what Charny talks about. Again, reiterating that sense of practicality, right? Hey, Don't worry about what your opponent is doing to you, but rather focus on what you're going to do to your opponent. That actually works like from a practical sense of like war and stuff like that, but also like from a political sense too, from like navigating social currents and stuff like that. Praise others over yourself. Guard your honor. Do not envy. Keep you from honoring others. This one's a really interesting one because especially people who are aspiring to a peerage might get a little salty sometimes, and they're like, man, that was really cool, but like, I wanted my recognition. Fuck me, where is it? Right? That happens. We're all fallible. It's okay. You know, but it is a caution. It is a word of caution from Charny. Never quarrel with a fool or a drunk. It's like playing chess against a pigeon, right? Sooner or later, they're gonna poop on the board and convince themselves like they won, right? Doesn't work. And lastly, love ladies, never boast. It's impolite to kiss and tell, right? Just saying, it's there. Avoid sleeping late in soft beds and eating too much fine food. Respectfully, Charny, we disagree. The lesser side may win, but only temporarily. Man, we should have gotten it. That's bullshit. They cheated. Don't worry about it. They'll find out. One of the things that I find interesting here is that in tournament, it's not just you and your opponents and then everybody on the list around you, right? It's the whole event, right? Everybody's looking at all times, every single time, even when you think they're not. And then lastly, temperance over excess. So we have this question. It's about time for us to be done, so I'm not going to have a conversation about it. But I want you to think about how do we see this reflected or contrasted in the SCA. I think there are many parts of this that show up in our events and like in our aspirations towards peerage, towards knighthood, and like the other relevant peerages as well. And some things that don't necessarily apply. For example, how many fighters go to a steakhouse after a long day of melee or tournament? Because I've certainly done that more than once, right? And then the next day they wake up at noon going, oh my God. Anyway, worth it. So, lastly, I'm gonna finish on this. Quick thing, I mentioned that I'm working towards this kind of idea of like comparative chivalry. And like for now, we have, this is just a snippet, but we're starting to see how certain philosophical concepts can be overlapping amongst different authors in different times and different cultures, and some things are very different, right? So, for example, the purpose of chivalry, for Charny, to fight and win wars. For Lowell, kind of the same, but with a specific like spread Christianity focus to it. The highest virtue for Charny is prowess. For Lowell, it's piety. In terms of Christianity, chivalry as a Christian order for Charny. Chivalry also as a Christian order for Lowell. Knighting both involves mass, but for Lowell, it also involves like a public celebration. Like if you get knighted, you have to do like a parade. It's a whole thing. For honor is acquired through successful deeds of arms for Charny, like what we talked about. For Lowell, honor is something that is given to and from others. When it comes to women, just women as a category, I'm very sorry for how that comes off. Just work with me on this. Women for Charny are separate from chivalric worthiness. However, for Lowell, they are intrinsic to chivalric worthiness because women give honor to other knights and other knights give honor to virtuous women. So there's an exchange of honor here going on, right? And lastly, in terms of aesthetics, right? Charny prescribes austerity and simplicity. Lowell prescribes finery. A good knight must dress in finery because they must respect the station that they belong to. And then lastly, worthiness, right? The theme of worthiness for Charny, there's a hierarchical sense of worthiness. Again, good, better, best. And then lastly for Lowell, binary. You are either worthy or you are not. Period in the sentence, right? So with that, folks, I'm gonna be done. That's it. That's the end of class. If you have, what's that?
Some Spanish.
Some Spanish. This is my QR code. I have this presentation in like a Google Drive that also has my other presentations and like stuff that I'm like ANS stuff that I'm working on. So if you want to like take a photo of it and save it, go for it. You're welcome to do it. Or you can just message me here, and I'm happy to discuss any questions. Or if you see me at an event, like I'm happy to chat. So no problem at all. With that, folks, I'm gonna be done. Yes.